Alright everyone, settle in for tonight's exploration. We're veering off the well-trodden path of heroic sagas and stepping into something a touch more unvarnished. Prepare for a deep dive not into the opulent balls of St. Petersburg or the grand maneuvers of Tsarist armies, but into the crushing monotony and the daily grinding hardship of life for a Russian serf in the early 19th century. That romanticized vision of idyllic village life of cheerful peasants singing in the fields, or the benevolent gaze of a noble landowner, while the unvarnished truth for the vast majority bound to the soil was often a far cry, an existence defined by backbreaking labor, inescapable poverty, and a profound lack of freedom, and frankly, your modern liberties and comforts would feel like an almost inconceivable fantasy. So find your coziest spot. If you appreciate a journey into the raw, unfiltered past, a like on the video would be fantastic, and do consider subscribing for more of these historical reality checks. As always, I'm curious to know where you're joining us from tonight. Drop a comment with your location and time. It's always a highlight seeing our global community. Okay, perhaps dim those lights. Let a soft ambient sound fill the room, and let's embark on tonight's rather sobering journey together. Your life is not your own. From the moment of your birth in a cramped, smoky izba, a simple wooden hut, you are the property of the local landowner, the baron or pomorshik. You are bound to the soil, bought and sold with the estate like livestock or farming implement. Your destiny is dictated not by your dreams or talents, but by the needs and whims of a master you may rarely see, or by the often harsher rule of his estate manager, the prikashik. The vast, seemingly endless Russian landscape, so poetic in paintings, is for you a sprawling prison without walls, its beauty a backdrop to your unceasing toil. The day begins before sunrise, not with a gentle awakening, but with the chill of the Russian morning seeping through the ill-fitting logs of your izba. The air inside is thick with the smell of stale wood smoke, unwashed bodies, sour cabbage, and perhaps the goats or chickens you might share your dwelling with in the harshest winter months for warmth. There is no privacy. Your family, parents, siblings, perhaps an elderly grandparent, sleeps huddled together on wooden benches or the warm top of the large clay oven that dominates the single room. Your clothing is coarse and patched, homespun linen or rough wool, offering scant protection against the biting winds of winter or the sweltering heat of summer. Boots, lapti woven from bast fiber, are a luxury. Often you work barefoot, your feet calloused and cracked. Your diet is meager and monotonous: black rye bread, watery kasha, porridge, cabbage soup, perhaps some potatoes or turnips. Meat is a rare treat, reserved for major holidays or if a sickly animal is slaughtered. Milk, if your family is fortunate enough to own a cow, is precious. The agricultural calendar dictates your existence, from the spring thaw, when the mud is ankle deep, to the frantic race of the summer harvest, and the preparations for the long frozen winter. Your life is an endless cycle of labor in the field. You work the Lord's land, the barshchaya, for a set number of days each week, often 3 or more, unpaid, using your own primitive tools. The remaining days, you struggle to cultivate your own small, often infertile allotment of land to feed your family and pay the Lord's dues, the obrok. The tools you use are rudimentary, often unchanged for centuries: a wooden plow, the soka, that barely scratches the surface of the soil, a sickle for reaping, a flail for threshing. The work is backbreaking, inefficient, and utterly dependent on the weather and your own physical strength. A drought, a flood, an early frost, any of these can mean starvation for your family. You watch the skies with a mixture of hope and dread, your life hanging on the caprice of nature. The relationship with the landowner, or his bailiff, is one of absolute subservience. They have the power of life and death over you, though outright killing might be rare as it diminishes their workforce. However, harsh punishments for perceived laziness, insubordination, or failure to meet quotas are common. The threat of the whip, of being sent for military service, a virtual death sentence of 25 years, or of being sold away from your family, hangs heavy over your every action. Justice is a concept that applies to others, not to you. Your izba is a dark, cramped, and often unsanitary dwelling. A single room, perhaps 10 by 15 feet, houses your entire family. The windows are small, covered with scraped animal bladder or oiled paper rather than glass, letting in little light. The large clay or brick oven provides heat and a place to cook, but it also fills the room with smoke if not properly managed, leading to chronic coughs and eye irritation. The floor is packed earth, cold and damp. Personal hygiene is a luxury. Water is drawn from a communal well or stream, often a considerable distance away. Soap is almost unheard of. Bathing might occur once a week in the village banya, steam bath, if your village is prosperous enough to have one, or simply by washing with cold water from a bucket. Lice and other vermin are constant companions, thriving in the close quarters and lack of cleanliness. Winter in rural Russia is a brutal, isolating experience. The land is blanketed in deep snow for months on end. Temperatures plummet to unimaginable lows. Outdoor work largely ceases, but the struggle for survival continues. You huddle in your izba, conserving firewood, mending tools, spinning thread, and praying you have enough stored food to last until spring. Boredom, hunger, and the oppressive cold are your winter companion. The darkness stretches for many hours each day. The Lord's dues, the obrok, are a constant burden. This could be a payment in kind, a portion of your meager harvest, a certain number of eggs, chickens or homespun cloth, or a cash payment, forcing you to find ways to earn money, perhaps by selling surplus produce if any, or engaging in cottage industries like woodworking or weaving. Failure to pay can result in severe repercussions, including the confiscation of your few possessions, or increased labor demands. Your personal freedom is virtually non-existent. You cannot leave the estate without the Lord's permission. You cannot marry someone from another estate without his consent and often a payment. He can dictate your work, your movements, even aspects of your personal life. You are in essence, a prisoner on the land where you were born, your life circumscribed by the boundaries of the estate and the will of your master. Family life is your primary source of solace, yet it too is subject to the whims of the system. Marriages are often arranged, sometimes by the Lord himself, to ensure a steady supply of new serfs. Children are born into the same bondage as their parents, their future already mapped out. The threat of a family member being sold away, or a son being conscripted into the army, is a constant source of anxiety and potential heartbreak. Religious faith, a deep-rooted Russian orthodoxy, provides a framework for your understanding of the world and a source of comfort in your suffering. Church holidays offer brief respites from labor, a chance for communal celebration, however meager. You attend services, observe fasts, and pray for intercession, for a better life if not in this world, than in the next. The village priest is often a figure of authority, sometimes a source of guidance, sometimes another burden if he too demands dues. Superstitions and folk beliefs are interwoven with your Christian faith. You believe in nature spirits, household sprites, and the power of omens and charms. These beliefs offer explanations for misfortunes and ways to try and influence a harsh and unpredictable world. Folk remedies, often ineffective, are your first line of defense against illness, as access to any formal medical care is virtually unknown. Illness and injury are constant threats. Hard labor, poor nutrition, and unsanitary living conditions make you susceptible to a host of diseases. Infant and child mortality rates are tragically high. A broken bone, a serious infection, can mean a slow, agonizing death, or permanent disability, rendering you unable to work, and a burden on your already struggling family. There is no safety net, no welfare beyond what your family or village community can provide. The village community, the mayor or община, provides a degree of social cohesion and mutual support. Land allotments might be periodically redistributed by the mayor, decisions made collectively. Neighbors help each other during harvest time or in cases of misfortune. Yet, the mayor can also be a source of pressure, enforcing conformity and ensuring that everyone fulfills their obligations to the Lord and the state. Moments of joy are fleeting and simple, often revolving around family, religious holidays, or seasonal celebration. A wedding, the birth of a child despite the anxieties it brings, a successful harvest, rare as it might be, a brief respite from work during a church festival. These are the small lights that punctuate the overwhelming darkness of your daily grind. Singing, dancing, and storytelling are vital outlets for communal expression and temporary escape. The landscape, though often harsh, can also be a source of subtle beauty, if you have the eyes to see it beyond your toil. The vast forests offer firewood, berries and mushrooms. The rivers and lakes might provide fish. The changing seasons, each with its own character, mark the passage of your life. But even these natural resources are often controlled by the Lord, and access may be restricted or taxed. Conscription into the Tsar's army is a dreaded fate. A term of service is typically 25 years, a virtual lifetime. The Lord decides which of his serfs will be sent when the levy is called. It means being torn from your family and village, subjected to brutal military discipline, and facing the high probability of death in one of the Tsar's many wars. A village weeps when its young men are taken. The concept of education is alien to your world. You are illiterate, as are most of your fellow serfs. Knowledge is passed down orally, through stories, songs, and practical instruction. The world beyond your village, and the Lord's estate, is a mysterious, unknown place, filled with vague terrors or fantastical imaginings, based on travelers' tales or the pronouncements of the priest. Your understanding of the wider political or social currents of Russia is minimal. The Tsar is a distant, almost godlike figure, the Little Father, often perceived as benevolent, with the local lords and officials being the source of your immediate oppression. News travels slowly, distorted by rumor and repetition. Your concerns are immediate, focused on survival, not on the affairs of state. The sheer physical exhaustion at the end of each day is overwhelming. Your muscles ache, your back screams, your hands are raw. You collapse onto your sleeping bench, knowing that the same relentless toil awaits you at dawn. Sleep is often deep but unrefreshing, a brief oblivion before the cycle begins anew. There is no concept of leisure as you would understand. The arbitrary nature of your master's power is a constant source of insecurity. A kind lord might be succeeded by a cruel one, an estate might be sold, and you along with it, to a new master with different rules, different demands. You have no say in these matters, no recourse, no right. You are entirely dependent on the character and whims of the person who owns you. Contact with the outside world is limited. Occasionally, traveling merchants, pilgrims or wandering storytellers might pass through your village, bringing news, goods or entertainment. These are rare breaks in the monotony, offering a fleeting glimpse of a larger world, but they also serve to highlight the narrow confines of your own existence. The changing seasons bring different forms of labor. Spring means plowing the heavy, wet soil and sowing the crop. Summer is the intense labor of haymaking and harvesting grain under the hot sun. Autumn is for threshing, storing produce, and preparing for winter. Even winter brings its chores, chopping wood, repairing tools, caring for livestock indoors and cottage industries. The work is never truly done. The fear of crop failure is ever present. A late frost, a summer drought, a hailstorm, or an infestation of pests, can wipe out months of labor and condemn your family to starvation or a winter of desperate want. You offer prayers, perform rituals, but ultimately, you are at the mercy of forces far beyond your control. The margin between sufficiency and disaster is razor thin. The interior of your esba in winter is a smoky, crowded and often fetid environment. The stove is kept burning constantly for warmth, but ventilation is poor. The smell of unwashed bodies, damp clothing, stored food and perhaps livestock is overpowering. Respiratory illnesses are common. The long nights are spent in close, often uncomfortable, proximity to your entire family. The social life of the village revolves around the church, the banya, if one exists, and informal gatherings in homes or at the village well. Gossip, storytelling, and shared complaints about the hardness of life are common forms of interaction. These moments of community, however brief, are vital for maintaining some semblance of social connection and shared identity. Your material possessions are few and meager: a few wooden bowls and spoons, a cooking pot, rough blankets, perhaps a religious icon in the corner of the esb. Your tools are precious, often passed down through generations. There is no room for luxuries, no concept of disposable income. Every item is functional, essential for survival. The power of the village elders and the head of your household, usually your father or grandfather, is considerable within the serf community itself. They make decisions, resolve disputes, and uphold tradition. While they are also subject to the Lord, they represent an internal structure of authority and order within your confined world. The thought of rebellion or organized resistance is usually a distant, dangerous fantasy. The power of the state and the nobility is overwhelming. Punishments for any form of uprising are swift and brutal. Survival often dictates a posture of outward subservience and resignation, whatever simmering resentment might lie beneath the surface. Hope for change is often deferred to the next life, or a mythical golden age. The occasional visit by the barren landowner to the estate can be a cause for both trepidation and a faint flicker of hope. Preparations are made, the village cleaned as much as possible. Some might try to petition the Lord directly for redress of grievances against the bailiff, though this is a risky endeavor. More often his visit is a reminder of his absolute power and your utter dependence. The contrast between your life and that of the nobility, should you ever glimpse it, is staggering. Their fine clothes, their plentiful food, their spacious homes, their leisure. It is a world so far removed from your own daily struggle as to be almost incomprehensible. This disparity is the bedrock of the system that enslaves you. The sounds of your world are primarily those of nature and hard labor. The wind in the trees, the flow of the river, the songs of birds, mixed with the thud of the axe, the swish of the scythe, the creak of the wooden plow, the lowing of cattle, and the shouts of men and women at work. The sounds of industry or complex machinery are largely absent from your rural existence. When a serf dies, the mourning is deep, but often subdued by the need to continue working. Funerals are simple, conducted by the village priest. The deceased is buried in the village graveyard, another soul returning to the Russian earth they toiled upon for their entire life. There is a sense of fatalism, an acceptance of life's harsh realities. The birth of a child is a moment of joy, but also a source of anxiety. Another mouth to feed, another soul destined for a life of servitude. Yet, children also represent continuity, the future of the family and the village community, however bleak that future might seem. They learn to work from a young age, contributing to the household economy as soon as they are able. The forest plays a significant role in your life. It provides firewood for warmth and cooking, timber for building and repairs, and a place to forage for berries, mushrooms, and it can also be a place of refuge, or a source of fear,
with tales of wild animals or bandits. Access to the forest is often controlled by the Lord, another aspect of his power. The concept of time is measured differently for not by clocks or precise schedules, but by the position of the sun, the changing seasons, the cycles of agricultural work, and the observance of religious holidays. Life has a cyclical, rather than linear rhythm, a sense of endless repetition. The lack of medical knowledge means that common ailments can be fatal: infections, fevers, childbirth complications. These often lead to death. Folk remedies, herbal concoctions, and superstitious practices are all that are available. A village wise woman or healer might possess some practical knowledge, but serious illnesses are usually beyond her ability to cure. The stories and songs passed down through generations are a vital part of your cultural heritage. They speak of heroes, saints, magical creatures, and the history of your people. They offer entertainment, moral lessons, and a sense of connection to the past. In a world with little literacy, oral tradition is paramount. The idea of owning the land you work is an impossible dream. You are tied to it, you nurture it with your sweat and blood, but it will never be yours. It belongs to the Lord, and your labor is for his benefit. This fundamental injustice is the defining characteristic of your existence as a serf. The vastness of Russia itself contributes to your sense of isolation. Your village is your world. The nearest town might be a day's journey away, a place you rarely visit. The capital city, the Tsar's court, are like legends, unimaginably distant. This insularity reinforces the power of local custom and the authority of the Lord. The village festivals, often tied to the agricultural calendar or religious holidays, are important communal events. They offer a chance for feasting, however modest, drinking, singing, dancing, and a temporary suspension of the usual hierarchies and hardships. These are moments when the community comes together to affirm its bonds and find collective joy. Your tools are often your most prized possessions, carefully maintained and repaired. A good axe, a sharp scythe, a sturdy plow, these are essential for your survival. They are an extension of your own body, the means by which you extract a meager living from the unyielding earth. Losing or breaking a tool can be a minor disaster. The authority of the state, beyond the Lord, is felt through occasional tax collectors or recruiting officers. These visits are usually unwelcome, bringing further demands on your already strained resources, or the threat of losing your sons to the army. The state is a distant, often predatory entity in your perception. The clothing you wear is functional, designed for durability rather than comfort or fashion. It is often patched and repatched, handed down from older siblings or parents. The colors are drab, derived from natural. Your appearance reflects your status at the very bottom of the social hierarchy. The smells of your daily life are earthy and often pungent. The rich scent of turned soil, the sharp odor of manure, the sweetness of hay in summer, the smoky interior of the izba, the aroma of baking rye bread, and the less pleasant smells of unwashed bodies and poor sanitation. Your olfactory world is a direct reflection of your close connection to the land and your living conditions. The silence of the vast winter landscape can be both beautiful and oppressive. The world is muffled by snow. Sounds carry different. It is a time for introspection, for storytelling, for the slow work of mending and crafting indoors, but it can also be a time of intense isolation, and a gnawing fear of the unknown, of what lies beyond your snowbound village. The possibility of being sold is a terrifying uncertainty. An estate can change hands due to debt, inheritance, or the Lord's whim. When this happens, you and your family are part of the transaction, your fate decided by men you have never met, in places you have never seen. This commodification is a fundamental aspect of your lack of freedom. A good harvest is a cause for profound relief and celebration. It means there will be enough food to last the winter, enough grain to pay your dues, and perhaps have a small surplus. These years are rare and precious, a temporary reprieve from the constant anxiety of hunger. The entire village shares in this relief. Even within the oppressive system of serfdom, there are small acts of resistance or agency, perhaps a hidden stash of grain, a cleverly negotiated abrupt payment, a song with subversive lyrics, or simply the enduring strength of family and community bond. These are the ways you maintain a sliver of dignity and humanity in the face of overwhelming power. The thought of freedom, of owning your own land, of making your own decisions, these are dangerous dreams, rarely spoken aloud. Yet, they may flicker in the hearts of some, a tiny spark of hope in the overwhelming darkness. For most, however, the reality of their bondage is too absolute, the prospect of change too remote, to contemplate seriously. Your world is one of resignation, punctuated by the endless rhythm of labor.
Across the immense, rolling expanse of the Russian landscape in the mid-19th century, a timeless rhythm seemed to govern existence. From the dense forests of the north to the fertile black earth steppes of the south, life was dictated by the turning of the seasons, the planting and the harvest, and the unyielding authority of a social order that appeared as permanent as the land itself. At the heart of this order was the institution of serfdom, krepostnoye pravo, a system that bound tens of millions of peasants, the vast majority of the population, not only to the land they tilled, but to the will of their masters. They were the baptized property of the nobility, souls counted alongside livestock in acres, their lives circumscribed by a system that had endured for centuries. Yet, beneath this seemingly immutable surface, profound tensions were accumulating, and the winds of change, stirred by intellectual currents, peasant unrest, and the shock of military defeat, were beginning to blow across the steppes, heralding a monumental, painful, and ultimately incomplete transformation. Russian serfdom, fully codified in the mid-17th century, was a deeply entrenched institution, more akin to chattel slavery than to the feudalism of medieval Western Europe. A nobleman's wealth was measured not just by his land, but by the number of souls he owned. These serfs could be bought, sold, traded, or given away as gambling debts, sometimes with their families, sometimes callously torn apart from them. They were subject to the landowner's jurisdiction, liable to corporal punishment, and required his permission to marry, to leave the estate, or to learn a trade. Their obligations to the master, the pomashchik, were twofold. Some performed labor service, or barshchina, toiling on the lord's fields for a set number of days each week. Others, particularly on less fertile estates, paid dues, or a brok, in cash or in kind, giving them a greater degree of personal autonomy, to work as artisans or laborers, though they remained legally bound. This system underpinned the entire social and economic structure of the Russian Empire, providing the nobility with their wealth and leisure, and the state with its soldiers and taxpayers. For generations, this order was maintained through a combination of tradition, religious sanction, and the ever-present threat of force. Yet, by the 19th century, the cracks in this edifice were becoming impossible to ignore. Within Russia itself, a growing intellectual unease with serfdom was taking hold. The westernizers, members of the intelligentsia, who looked to Europe for models of progress, saw serfdom as a barbaric and shameful institution that stifled economic development and kept Russia mired in backwardness. Writers like Ivan Turgenev, in his poignant collection of stories, A Sportsman's Sketches, subtly but powerfully exposed the humanity of the peasants and the injustices they suffered, awakening the conscience of literate society. Even among the Slavophiles, who rejected Western models and celebrated Russia's unique spiritual path, many found serfdom morally indefensible, a violation of Orthodox Christian principles. More ominously for the state, peasant unrest was steadily increasing. While there was no single large-scale rebellion, the decades preceding the 1860s saw thousands of localized disturbances, riots, arson, attacks on landlords and their agents, and a pervasive, simmering discontent. The decisive catalyst for change, however, came not from internal debate or peasant anger, but from a catastrophic and humiliating military failure on the international stage. The Crimean War, which raged from 1853 to 1856, pitted Russia against an alliance of the Ottoman Empire, Britain, and France. The conflict starkly exposed the profound weaknesses of the Russian state. Its army, composed of conscripted serfs, serving 25-year terms, was poorly equipped, badly supplied, and led by an often incompetent officer corps. The lack of railways made it impossible to efficiently transport troops and supplies to the front. Russia's industrial and technological backwardness compared to the Western powers was laid bare. The defeat was a national humiliation, a clear signal that the serf-based system, which had once been the foundation of Russia's military might, was now the primary cause of its weakness and vulnerability. It was into this atmosphere of crisis and soul-searching that Tsar Alexander the Scented ascended to the throne in 1855, inheriting a nation defeated in war and teetering on the brink of internal collapse. Alexander was not a natural liberal or a radical reformer. By temperament and training, he was a conservative autocrat, deeply committed to the principles of his father, the iron-fisted Tsar Nicholas V. Yet, he was also a pragmatist, who recognized the dire reality of Russia's situation. He understood that serfdom was not only a moral blight, but also a fundamental obstacle to military modernization, industrial development, and social stability. In a famous speech delivered to the nobility of Moscow in March 1856, he articulated the stark choice facing the nation, uttering the words that would define his reign: "It is better to abolish serfdom from above, than to wait for the time when it will begin to abolish itself from below." The Tsar had made his decision. The edifice of serfdom had to be dismantled to save the autocracy and the empire itself.
The task of designing and implementing such a monumental reform was immensely complex and fraught with political peril. Abolishing an institution that had defined Russian society for centuries, and that formed the very basis of the nobility's economic existence, was a Herculean undertaking. Alexander established a series of secret committees, composed primarily of high-ranking officials and nobles, to study the issue and draft proposals. The process was tortuous, marked by fierce debates and stubborn resistance from vested interests. The landowning gentry, while diverse in their views, were largely united in their fear of losing their land and their authority. They engaged in protracted struggles to protect their interests, arguing over every detail of the proposed emancipation. The central questions were deeply contentious. Should the serfs be freed with land, or should they be liberated as a landless proletariat, dependent on the nobility for employment? If they were to receive land, how much should they get, and from where? Should it be the plots they had traditionally cultivated for their own subsistence, or some other allotment? And crucially, should the nobles be compensated for the loss of their serfs' labor and, more contentiously, for the land that would be transferred to the peasants? And if so, who would pay? These questions were debated for years, with reform-minded bureaucrats, such as the energetic Nikolai Milyutin, clashing with conservative landowners, who sought to limit the scope of the reform and preserve as much of their privilege as possible. After years of deliberation, a final set of statutes was agreed upon, representing a complex and deeply flawed compromise. On March 3, 1861, the Emancipation Manifesto was signed into law by Alexander II. On paper it was a revolutionary act of immense significance. With the stroke of a pen, over 23 million privately owned serfs were granted their personal freedom. They could no longer be bought or sold. They could own property, engage in business, and marry without their former master's consent. This granting of civil rights to a vast segment of the population was a momentous step. However, the terms under which this freedom was granted were deeply problematic, and would sow the seeds of future conflict. The emancipation was not a simple act of liberation, but a complex legal and economic transaction. The freed serfs were to be granted allotments of land, but the size of these allotments was often smaller than the plots they had previously farmed for their own use. Furthermore, the land was not given to them freely. The peasants were required to pay for their allotments through a system of redemption payment. The government compensated the nobles for the land they lost, and in turn charged the peasants for it, to be paid back to the state, in installments, over a period of 49 years. This created a crushing financial burden for generations of peasants, tying them to a long-term debt to the state. Moreover, the land was typically not granted to individual peasants, but to the village commune, known as the Mir Ochchena. The commune became collectively responsible for paying the redemption dues and taxes for all its members. It periodically redistributed the land among its households, a practice that discouraged individual initiative and long-term investment in improving the soil. The authority of the commune often replaced the authority of the landlord, restricting the peasants' freedom of movement, as they could not leave the village without settling their share of the collective debt. In essence, while freed from the personal bondage of the landowner, the peasant was now bound to the commune and the state through a web of financial obligations and administrative controls. The proclamation of the manifesto was a carefully managed affair. Fearing popular unrest, the government delayed the announcement for several weeks, then had it read aloud by priests in churches across the empire during Lent. The reaction of the peasantry was a mixture of confusion, initial jubilation, and then widespread disappointment and disillusion. Many peasants had harbored a naive faith in the Tsar as a benevolent father figure, believing he would grant them a true or golden charter, giving them all the land they worked free of charge. When the complex and unfavorable terms of the actual emancipation became clear, many felt betrayed, believing the true will of the Tsar had been hidden or perverted by the corrupt nobility and bureaucracy. This led to a wave of peasant disturbances in the months following the proclamation, with hundreds of riots and uprisings that had to be suppressed by military force. The long-term consequences of this flawed emancipation were profound and far-reaching. Socially, it created a vast, new class of legally free citizens, but many remained trapped in poverty, burdened by debt, and constrained by the authority of the commune. The traditional patriarchal structure of rural life was disrupted, leading to social dislocation, as some peasants sought work in the burgeoning industrial cities, while others remained on the land, struggling to survive on their inadequate allotments. Economically, the reform had mixed results. While it did provide a new pool of free labor for industrialization, and eventually contributed to the development of a market economy, agricultural productivity grew slowly. The heavy redemption payments drained capital from the countryside, and the communal land tenure system often hindered agricultural innovation. Many nobles, deprived of their unpaid labor force, and often lacking the skills or inclination for efficient farm management, struggled to adapt. They sold off their estates, leading to a decline in the economic and political power of the gentry over the long term. Politically, the emancipation, intended to strengthen the state and prevent revolution, ironically ended up fueling the very radicalism it sought to quell. The deep disappointment and continued suffering of the peasantry created a fertile ground for revolutionary propaganda. The populist activists of the 1870s, the Narodniki, who went to the people, hoping to incite a peasant revolution, found an audience receptive to their message of injustice, even if their immediate efforts failed. The emancipation demonstrated that reform from above was possible, but its perceived inadequacy and injustice convinced many radicals that only a complete overthrow of the autocratic system would bring true liberation for the Russian people. In a tragic turn of history, Alexander II, the Tsar Liberator, was assassinated in 1881 by a revolutionary group, People's Will, who believed his reforms did not go far enough. His successors, Alexander III and Nicholas II, reacted to this by reversing many of his liberal policies and implementing a period of harsh reaction, further exacerbating social tension. The emancipation of the serfs in 1861 stands as one of the most significant events in Russian history, a watershed moment that irrevocably altered the course of the nation. It was a reform of immense scale and noble ambition, a courageous attempt by an autocratic ruler to dismantle a centuries-old institution that was holding his country back. It granted personal freedom to millions, and was an indispensable first step on Russia's long and painful road to modern. Yet, it was also a deeply flawed compromise, shaped by the resistance of entrenched elites and the cautious, conservative instincts of the state. It replaced one set of chains with another, freeing the peasant from the landlord, only to bind him to debt and the In resolving one great problem, it created a host of new ones that would fester for the next half-century, contributing to the social and political pressures that ultimately culminated in the cataclysmic revolutions. The story of the Great Emancipation is a profound and somber lesson in the immense difficulty of enacting fundamental social change, a testament to the fact that the path from bondage to true freedom is often far longer and more arduous than a single stroke of an emperor's pen can decree.
In the vast expanse of West Africa, where the fertile savanna grasslands give way to the sands of the Sahara, great empires have risen and fallen, their fortunes built upon the control of vital resources and the ancient, ever-shifting trade routes that crisscross the continent. Among the most powerful and wealthy of these was the Mali Empire, a realm whose name once echoed from the shores of the Atlantic to the heart of the Great Desert. At the zenith of its power in the early 14th century, Mali was ruled by an emperor, or Mansa, whose wealth was so immense it defied imagination, and whose piety would lead him on a journey so spectacular that its fame would reach the far corners of the medieval world, forever altering the perception of West Africa and leaving an indelible mark on its cultural landscape. This was Mansa Musa, the Lion of Mali, and his story, particularly that of his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca, is an epic of faith, fabulous wealth, and profound cultural transformation. The origins of the Mali Empire lay in the 13th century, with the heroic figure of Sundiata Keita, the Lion King, whose story is preserved and celebrated in the great Mandinka oral epic. According to the tradition, Sundiata was a disabled prince of the small Mandinka kingdom of Kangaba, who overcame exile and adversity to unite the Mandinka clans. He challenged and defeated the powerful sorcerer king Sumaworo Kante of the Salso kingdom at the Battle of Kirina, around the year. From this victory, Sundiata forged a new unified state, the Mali Empire, establishing its capital at Niani, and laying the foundations for a system of government that balanced central authority with local traditions. He organized the society into clans based on occupation and established a great assembly of elders to advise the Mansa, creating a stable and cohesive political entity. The source of Mali's immense power and prosperity was its strategic control over the trans-Saharan trade routes, and most importantly, its access to the seemingly inexhaustible gold fields of West Africa. The lands of Bambouk, Buri, and Akan, situated to the south of the empire's heartland, produced vast quantities of gold. While the Mali emperors did not control the mines directly, they controlled the trade in the gold dust that flowed northwards from them. This gold was one half of a vital commercial equation. The other half was salt. In the heart of the Sahara, at desert mines like Takaza, huge blocks of pure salt were quarried from the desiccated earth. For the peoples of the forest and savanna regions, where salt was scarce, this mineral was as precious as gold, essential for preserving food and for life itself. A vibrant trade developed, with caravans of camels carrying slabs of salt southward from the desert, to be exchanged in the markets of Mali for its equivalent weight, or sometimes more in gold. This gold for salt trade, along with commerce in ivory, kola nuts and enslaved people, generated immense revenues for the Mansa, who taxed the goods passing through his realm. It was upon this foundation of staggering wealth that Mansa Musa came to the throne around the ninth emperor of the Keita dynasty. He inherited a vast, stable and prosperous empire. Musa was a devout Muslim, and as ruler, he was obliged by his faith to perform the Hajj, the sacred pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. It was a journey of immense spiritual significance, but for a ruler of his stature and resources, it was also an opportunity to display the immense power and wealth of his empire to the wider world. In 1324, Mansa Musa embarked on a pilgrimage that would become the stuff of legend. The scale of his caravan was almost beyond comprehension. Contemporary Arab chroniclers, who witnessed its passage through their cities, described it with a sense of awe and disbelief. The procession was said to have included some 60,000 men, including a personal retinue of 12,000 attendants, and enslaved people, all dressed in fine brocade and Persian silk. A vanguard of 500 heralds, each bearing a staff of pure gold, marched ahead of the Mansa, who rode on horseback. But most spectacular of all was the transport of his wealth. The caravan included a train of 80 to 100 camels, each reportedly laden with 300 pounds of gold dust. This was not the entirety of his treasury, but merely the funds for the journey's expenses, a testament to the unimaginable riches at his command. The journey itself was a monumental undertaking, a moving city traversing thousands of miles of some of the world's most unforgiving terrain. The caravan traveled from Niani northwards across the Sahel, stopping at key trading cities within the empire like Walata, before venturing into the vast emptiness of the Sahara. They journeyed from oasis to oasis, their immense numbers a testament to the meticulous planning and logistical expertise required to ensure supplies of food and water for so many people and animals. After months of arduous travel, the magnificent procession emerged from the desert, and arrived in Cairo, the bustling capital of the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt, one of the great centers of the Islamic world. Mansa Musa's stay in Cairo in July of 1324 became a legendary event in the city's history. The splendor of his entourage and the sheer scale of his wealth left the Cairnese astounded. He was a generous guest, bestowing lavish gifts upon the Mamluk Sultan, his courtiers, government officials, religious scholars and even the ordinary people of the city. He spent and gave away gold with such astonishing profligacy that he single-handedly disrupted the entire economy of the region. The sudden massive influx of gold caused its value to plummet in the markets of Cairo, Alexandria and beyond. According to some accounts, the price of gold did not fully recover for over a decade. This unintentional economic consequence was the most powerful testament to the scale of Mali's wealth, a fact that was not lost on the merchants and scholars of the Mamluk Empire, whose accounts would soon spread the tale of the fabulously wealthy African king throughout the Mediterranean world. From Cairo, Mansa Musa continued his journey to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, where he fulfilled the sacred rituals of the Hajj. He performed his religious duties with great piety and continued his practice of generous donations, funding charitable works and giving alms to the poor. The pilgrimage was a profound spiritual experience for him, but it was also a journey of intellectual and cultural discovery. He conversed with scholars, observed the magnificent architecture of the great cities of the Islamic heartland, and became determined to bring this level of learning and architectural sophistication back to his own empire. On his return journey, his caravan, though now somewhat depleted of its gold, was enriched with a new kind of treasure. Mansa Musa had persuaded numerous scholars, jurists, and most notably, an Andalusian poet and architect, named Abu Ishaq as-Sahili, to accompany him back to Mali. He had spent so lavishly on his journey, that he reportedly had to borrow money at high interest from Cairo merchants to finance his return trip, a detail that further highlights the sheer scale of his expenditures. The cultural harvest from this great pilgrimage would transform the Mali Empire. Upon his return, Mansa Musa initiated an ambitious building program, particularly in the key cities of Timbuktu and Gao. He commissioned as-Sahili to design new mosques and other important buildings,
introducing the distinctive mud brick and timber-supported architectural style of North Africa and the Middle East to the Sahel. The Great Djungaraber Mosque in Timbuktu, with its characteristic earthen minarets, was built during this period, and still stands today as a monument to this era of architectural innovation. He also funded the construction of madrasas, or schools of Islamic learning, and libraries, fostering an environment of scholarship that would elevate his empire to new intellectual heights. The city of Timbuktu, strategically located on the bend of the Niger River at the southern edge of the Sahara, benefited immensely from Mansa Musa's patronage, beginning its transformation into the jewel of the Sahel. Already an important commercial hub, it now flourished as a world-renowned center of Islamic scholarship and learning. The Sankore Madrasa, often referred to as the University of Sankore, along with other centers of learning, attracted scholars and students from across the Islamic world. A thriving book trade developed in Timbuktu, with scribes meticulously copying manuscripts of theology, law, mathematics, astronomy and literature. It was said that books became one of the most profitable items of trade, their value sometimes exceeding that of other precious goods. Timbuktu became a cosmopolitan city of great learning, its libraries housing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, its reputation for intellectual rigor, rivaling that of other great Islamic centers. Under Mansa Musa, the Mali Empire was a well-organized and effectively governed state. The Mansa presided over a court in Niamey, with a complex bureaucracy to manage the empire's finances and administration. The vast realm was divided into provinces, often ruled by governors, or farbas, appointed by the emperor. The army maintained peace and security along the trade routes, ensuring the safe passage of caravans. The system of tribute and taxation, based on the empire's agricultural and commercial wealth, provided the resources for the emperor's grand projects and the maintenance of his court. While Islam was the religion of the court and the urban centers, traditional African beliefs and practices continued to thrive among the rural populace, and the emperors of Mali generally practiced a tolerant form of Islam that allowed for this religious diversity. Mansa Musa's long reign, which lasted for about 25 years, is considered the golden age of the Mali Empire. However, after his death around 1337, the empire began a slow, protracted decline. His successors lacked his vision and administrative skill. The empire was beset by internal succession disputes and civil strife, which weakened the central authority of the Mansa. Powerful vassal states on the periphery of the empire, most notably the rising Songhai people centered on the city of Gao, began to assert their independence and chip away at Mali's territory. External pressures, including raids by Tuareg nomads from the desert and Masi kingdoms from the south, further destabilized the realm. By the late 15th century, the once mighty Mali Empire had been largely eclipsed by the new and powerful Songhai Empire, which seized control of Timbuktu and the lucrative trans-Saharan trade route. Despite its eventual decline, the legacy of the Mali Empire, and particularly of Mansa Musa, is profound. His spectacular Hajj had a lasting impact on the medieval world's perception of Africa. For the first time, West Africa was not seen as a mysterious unknown land, but as the source of incredible wealth and the home of a powerful and sophisticated Islamic empire. This newfound fame was reflected in European maps of the era. The famous Catalan Atlas, created in 1375, prominently features a depiction of Mansa Musa, seated on a throne, holding a golden nugget and a golden scepter, a powerful image that captured the European imagination. The intellectual and cultural flourishing that Mansa Musa sponsored in Timbuktu created an enduring legacy of African scholarship. The thousands of manuscripts that have survived from Timbuktu's libraries are a precious testament to this rich intellectual heritage, covering a vast range of subjects and demonstrating the vibrant academic life of the city. Today, Mansa Musa is remembered as one of the most powerful and influential rulers in African history, a symbol of a golden age of wealth, power and learning. His story challenges narrow perceptions of the medieval world, revealing it to be a place of dynamic, interconnected civilizations, where a West African emperor could profoundly impact the economy of the Middle East, and place his realm firmly on the map of the known world. His river of gold may have long since been absorbed into the treasuries of history, but the cultural and intellectual wealth he cultivated continues to resonate as a testament to the glorious achievements of the Mali Empire.
Out of the morning mists of the North Sea, a new and terrifying shape began to appear on the horizons of late 8th century Europe. It was long, sleek, and low in the water, its gracefully curved prow often carved into the menacing head of a dragon or serpent. Propelled by a single large square sail of striped wool and the rhythmic pull of oars, it moved with a swiftness and agility that seemed almost supernatural. This was the Longship, the vessel that would carry the Norse peoples out of their Scandinavian homeland and launch an era of exploration. trade and violent raiding that would stretch from the shores of North America to the bustling markets of Constantinople. For nearly 3 centuries the Viking Age would see these Northmen erupt onto the world stage, leaving a complex legacy of destruction and creation, of fear and fascination, a legacy that reshaped the political and cultural map of Europe. The Scandinavian homeland that spawned this explosive expansion was a land of dramatic contrasts. Deep, dark fjords cutting into rugged coastlines, dense forests and short, precious seasons of agricultural fertility. Life was hard, governed by the turning of the seasons and a deep-seated code of honor, loyalty and reputation. Norse society was structured around the family and the clan, led by local chieftains or jarls, who commanded the allegiance of free farmers and warriors. They were a people with a sophisticated legal system, where disputes were settled at regional assemblies known as the Thing, and a rich oral culture of epic poetry and intricate mythology. Their gods were powerful and capricious: Odin the All-Father, god of wisdom, poetry and war; Thor the Thunderer, defender of gods and mortals with his mighty hammer Mjolnir; and Freya, goddess of love, fertility and battle. It was a worldview that embraced both the harsh realities of life and the pursuit of glory, in this world and the next. The precise causes for the sudden beginning of the Viking Age are a matter of scholarly debate, but it was likely a confluence of several factors. The longship itself was a key technological innovation. Its clinker-built hull, with overlapping planks riveted together, gave it both strength and flexibility to ride ocean swells. Its shallow draft meant it could navigate not only the high seas but also shallow coastal waters and far upriver, allowing for surprise attacks deep within enemy territory. At the same time, population growth in Scandinavia may have been putting pressure on limited arable land, forcing younger sons to seek their fortunes abroad. The rise of more powerful kings and the consolidation of political power at home may also have pushed rival chieftains and their followers to seek new lands and opportunities elsewhere. Finally, they saw a Europe to the south that was relatively wealthy, yet often politically fragmented and poorly defended, its coastal monasteries filled with gold, silver and other portable treasures. The Viking Age is often said to have begun with a single, shocking event. In the year 73, Norse longships landed on the holy island of Lindisfarne, off the northeast coast of England. The raiders sacked the peaceful and undefended monastery, slaughtering monks and carrying off its precious relics and treasure. The attack sent a wave of horror throughout Christian Europe. It was the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself for decades, as Viking raiders targeted coastal and riverine settlements across the British Isles, Francia and beyond, their lightning-fast attacks leaving devastation in their wake. But the story of the Vikings is far more complex than that of mere plunderers. They were also intrepid explorers, shrewd traders and ambitious settlers, and their expansion followed 3 distinct though sometimes overlapping paths. The westward expansion was primarily the domain of the Norwegian Vikings. Driven by a quest for new land, they used the North Atlantic as a highway. They sailed to and colonized the sparsely inhabited islands of Shetland, Orkney, and the Hebrides, establishing Norse earldoms that would endure for centuries. From there they pushed further into the unknown. In the late 9th century, they began the settlement of Iceland, a large volcanic island in the middle of the ocean. Here they established a unique society, a commonwealth governed not by a king, but by a legal assembly, the Althing. The Icelandic Commonwealth became a vibrant center of Norse culture, and it was here, centuries later, that their great family sagas and mythological poems were written down, preserving their history and worldview. The voyages continued. Around the year 982, an Icelandic chieftain named Eric the Red, exiled for manslaughter, sailed west from Iceland and discovered a vast, ice-bound landmass. Hoping to attract settlers, he gave it the deceptively appealing name Greenland. He established a Norse colony there that survived for nearly 500 years, a testament to their ability to adapt to some of the most extreme environments on Earth. The final extraordinary chapter of this westward exploration was led by Eric's son, Leif Erikson. Around the year 1000, guided by earlier accounts of sailors blown off course, Leif sailed west from Greenland and landed on the shores of North America, which he called Vinland, the land of wine, for the wild grapes he found there. Archaeological evidence at Lonso Meadows in modern-day Newfoundland has confirmed the presence of a Norse settlement from this period. The Vikings had reached the North American continent nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Their settlement, however, was short-lived, likely due to its remoteness, small numbers, and hostile encounters with the indigenous peoples, whom the Norse called Skrællingar. The southern path of expansion was dominated by the Danish Vikings.
Their powerful fleets launched large-scale raids on the wealthy kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish Empire. In the mid-9th century, the so-called Great Heathen Army, a large coalition of Norse warriors, invaded England, not just to raid, but to conquer and settle. They overran several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and by the 870s, a large portion of eastern and northern England was under Viking control, a region that came to be known as the Danelaw. The resistance was famously led by Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, who, after many struggles, managed to halt the Danish advance and secure a treaty that formalized the division of the country. Over time, the Danish settlers in the Danelaw integrated with the local Anglo-Saxon population, profoundly influencing the English language and culture. Danish political ambitions in England culminated in the early 11th century, when King Canute the Great ruled a vast North Sea empire that included Denmark, Norway and England. In continental Europe, Viking longships sailed up the Seine, the Loire, and other rivers, sacking cities as far inland as Paris. The Frankish kingdom struggled to mount an effective defense against these swift and unpredictable attacks. In the early 10th century, the Frankish king Charles the Simple adopted a new strategy. He made a deal with a powerful Viking leader named Rollo, granting him the territory around the lower Seine estuary in return for his loyalty and his promise to defend the river from other Viking incursions. This region became known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. The Norse settlers of Normandy quickly adopted the local French language and Christian religion, yet they retained their martial vigor and adventurous spirit. Within a few generations, these Gallo-Norsemen, the Normans, would become one of the most dynamic and formidable forces in Europe, culminating in their conquest of England in 916. The eastern path was primarily taken by Vikings from what is now Sweden, who were known in the east as the Rus or Varangians. Rather than sailing the open ocean, they journeyed down the great river systems of Eastern Europe, the Dnieper and the Volga, dragging their ships over land portages when necessary. They were more traders and mercenaries than raiders, though they were certainly capable of both. They established fortified trading posts along these river routes, imposing their rule on the local Slavic tribes. These Rus, chieftains, played a foundational role in the creation of the first East Slavic state, Kievan Rus, the precursor to modern Russia, Ukraine and Belarus. Their trade routes connected the Baltic Sea in the north, with the two great centers of wealth and civilization in the south, the Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic Caliphate. From the northern forests, they brought furs, honey, wax, amber, and enslaved Slavic people. They traded these goods in Constantinople, the magnificent capital of Byzantium, and in the markets of the Caliphate, for Arab silver dirhams, Byzantine silk, spices, and other luxury goods. So many Vikings traveled to Constantinople that they became an established presence there. The most formidable among them were recruited into the Varangian Guard, the elite personal bodyguard of the Byzantine emperor. For centuries these towering, axe-wielding Northmen served as the loyal and feared protectors of the Byzantine throne, their reputation for courage and loyalty legendary throughout the known world. Viking society was complex and dynamic. While known for their martial prowess, most Norsemen were farmers and traders. Their craftspeople excelled at woodworking and metalworking, and their art was characterized by intricate, swirling patterns of interlacing animals, evolving through distinct styles known as the borer, gelling, and urna style. Norse women, while living in a patriarchal society, enjoyed a higher status and more legal rights than many of their counterparts in Christian Europe. They could inherit property, run farms in their husband's absence, and initiate divorce. Viking towns, such as Birka in Sweden, Hedeby in Denmark, and later Dublin in Ireland, became thriving centers of international trade and craft production. By the end of the 11th century, the Viking Age was drawing to a close. The causes for its end were as complex as those for its beginning. The gradual Christianization of Scandinavia was a key factor. As the kings of Denmark, Norway and Sweden converted to Christianity, their societies were brought more into the mainstream of European culture. The new faith discouraged raiding against fellow Christians and altered the old warrior ethos. Simultaneously, the establishment of strong centralized monarchies in Scandinavia provided internal stability and absorbed the martial energies of the warrior elite into national armies, rather than freelance raiding parties. At the same time, the kingdoms of Europe had become better organized and more adept at defending themselves, building castles, raising armies, and establishing navies, making Viking raids less profitable and more risky. Finally, the Vikings who had settled abroad, in England, Normandy, Russia, and elsewhere, gradually assimilated into the local populations, adopting their languages, religions, and customs, their distinct Norse identity fading over generations. The legacy of the Viking Age is multifaceted and profound. It left a significant linguistic imprint, with hundreds of Old Norse words, relating to the sea, warfare and law, becoming integrated into the English language. Their genetic footprint can be found across the British Isles, northern France, and Eastern Europe. They were a disruptive and often destructive force, but they were also a dynamic one. They were instrumental in the formation of new political entities, from the Icelandic Commonwealth to the Duchy of Normandy and Kievan Rus. As traders, they created vast commercial networks that linked disparate parts of the world, and as explorers, their voyages connected continents, pushing the boundaries of the known world further than any Europeans before them. The popular image of the Viking, often reduced to a horned helmeted barbarian, is a caricature that belies the complexity of their culture and their impact. They were a people of profound dualities, brutal raiders, and shrewd merchants, pagan visionaries and pragmatic settlers, destroyers of old worlds, and creators of new ones. The saga of the Viking Age is the story of how a society on the northern fringe of Europe, powered by a remarkable maritime technology and an indomitable spirit of adventure, forever changed the course of history, its echoes still resonating in the languages, cultures and peoples of the modern world. The dragon-headed longships have long since vanished from the seas, but the wake of their journeys continues to shape our shores.
In the dimly lit halls of medieval European castles and the opulent palaces of Renaissance princes, wealth and status were displayed in myriad ways, in fine silks, heavy gold chains and elaborate tapestries, but perhaps no indicator power was more potent than the subtle aroma that graced the banquet table, the scent of spices from a distant, almost mythical world, a dusting of nutmeg on a custard, a few precious peppercorns in a sauce, a clove studding a roasted fowl. These were not mere flavorings. They were declarations of immense wealth, symbols of a connection to the fabled, sun-drenched lands of the East, their value at times rivaling that of gold itself. For centuries, the desire for these small dried seeds, berries and barks, would drive explorers across unknown oceans, fuel brutal wars, build and destroy empires, and lay the foundations of a truly global economy. This is the story of the spice trade, an epic of how the human craving for flavor reshaped the map of the world. The allure of spices is ancient. The civilizations of Rome, Greece, and Egypt prized them not only for their ability to preserve food and enliven monotonous diets, but also for their use in medicine, perfumes, and sacred incense. Pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves and nutmeg from islands, so remote they were shrouded in legend, all made their way to the Mediterranean world, via long and tortuous routes. After the fall of the Roman Empire, these trade links became more tenuous, and spices grew even rarer and more expensive in Europe. During the High Middle Ages, the trade revived and fell under a tightly controlled structure. Spices from the Moluccas, or Spice Islands, in modern-day Indonesia, and from India and Ceylon, were transported by local sailors and merchants to ports in the Indian Ocean. From there, Arab traders carried them by sea up the Red Sea, or overland through Persia, to the great emporia of the Levant, such as Alexandria and Aleppo. At these Mediterranean ports, a single European power, the Republic of Venice, had cunningly positioned itself as the indispensable middleman. Through shrewd diplomacy and treaties with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, and later the Ottoman Empire, Venetian merchants secured a near monopoly on the distribution of spices into Europe. Their galleys, laden with this precious cargo, returned to Venice, from where the spices were sold at exorbitant prices, to the rest of the continent. This lucrative trade was the bedrock of Venice's immense wealth and power, making the city the glittering, envied queen of the Mediterranean. For the other burgeoning nations of Europe, particularly those on the Atlantic coast, this Venetian and Muslim stranglehold on the most profitable trade in the world was a source of profound frustration. The source of the most valuable spices was a closely guarded secret, wrapped in fantastical tales, told by traders to protect their monopoly and inflate prices. They spoke of cinnamon harvested from the nests of giant birds in Arabia, and of pepper protected by fiery serpents. The reality was even more extraordinary. The true sources were a handful of tiny volcanic islands in the Banda Sea, part of the Moluccan archipelago in what is now eastern Indonesia. On this small cluster of islands, and nowhere else on Earth, grew the trees that produced two of the most coveted spices, nutmeg, and the lacy scarlet aril that surrounds it. Cloves, another immensely valuable spice, grew only on a few islands in the nearby North Moluccas. like ternate and Tidor. For centuries the entire world's supply of these precious commodities originated from this geographically minuscule area, a fact that would eventually make these remote and peaceful islands the epicenter of a violent global struggle. The nation that would shatter the old order was Portugal. Small kingdom on the edge of Europe, it possessed a long Atlantic coastline, a hardy seafaring tradition, and a fervent crusading zeal. Driven by a desire to outflank their Muslim rivals, to spread Christianity, and above all to gain direct access to the immense profits of the spice trade, Portuguese navigators, under the sponsorship of figures like Prince Henry the Navigator, began a systematic exploration of the African coast. For decades, they pushed progressively southward, charting unknown waters and establishing trading posts. This quest culminated in the epic voyage of Vasco da Gama. In 1497 he set sail from Lisbon, rounded Africa's Cape of Good Hope, and with the help of an experienced Arab pilot, navigated across the Indian Ocean, arriving at Calicut on the coast of India. For the first time, a European power had established a direct, all-sea route to the east, bypassing the traditional overland routes and the Venetian monopoly. The age of maritime dominance had begun. The Portuguese, however, did not arrive as peaceful traders. They were vastly outnumbered in the bustling, ancient commercial world of the Indian Ocean. They compensated for this with superior naval gunnery and ruthless aggression. Their strategy was not to conquer vast land territories, but to establish a maritime empire, the Estado da India, based on control of the sea lane. Under formidable commanders like Francisco de Almeida and Afonso de Albuquerque, they seized strategic ports, building fortresses at locations like Goa in India, Malacca on the Malay Peninsula, and Hormuz at the entrance to the Persian Gulf. From these fortified bases, their heavily armed fleets dominated the ocean, imposing a system known as cartaz. All local merchant ships were required to purchase a Portuguese pass, or cartaz, and pay customs duties at Portuguese port. Any ship caught without one was subject to having its cargo confiscated and its crew punished or killed. Through this systematic and often brutal application of force, Portugal seized control of a significant portion of the spice trade, redirecting its flow from the Red Sea to the new sea route around Africa, and Lisbon quickly replaced Venice as Europe's primary spice emporium. For a century Portugal enjoyed the fruits of its daring and its violence, but by the dawn of the 17th century, new, even more formidable rivals appeared in the East, the Dutch and the English. These Protestant nations of Northern Europe, locked in their own struggles with Catholic Spain, which had united with Portugal, were eager to claim their share of the lucrative trade. They did so through a revolutionary new form of commercial organization, the Joint Stock Company. The English East India Company (EIC), founded in 1600, and the Dutch United East India Company (VOC), founded in 1602, were granted immense powers by their respective governments. They were not just trading firms, they were effectively states within a state, with the authority to raise armies, build forts, wage war and sign treaties. Backed by the immense capital of private investors, these companies launched a direct challenge to Portuguese dominance in Asia. The ensuing struggle was a new kind of global conflict, a war fought not between nations, but between corporations. The Dutch VOC, in particular, proved to be a more organized, better financed, and utterly ruthless competitor. They systematically attacked Portuguese holdings, driving them from Malacca, Ceylon, and many of their strongholds. But their ultimate goal was not merely to supplant the Portuguese, but to achieve something the Portuguese never had, a complete and total monopoly over the production of the most valuable spices, particularly cloves, nutmeg and mace. This ambition would lead them to the remote Banda Islands, the sole source of nutmeg, and to one of the most brutal episodes in the history of colonialism. The Banda Islands were inhabited by a network of small, independent communities, led by village elders, who had long traded their precious nutmeg peacefully with Malay, Javanese, and Arab merchants. When the Dutch arrived, they sought to impose exclusive contracts, demanding that the Bandanese sell their nutmeg and mace only to the VOC, and at a fixed, low price. The Bandanese, accustomed to free trade, resisted and continued to trade with the English, who offered better prices. The Dutch response was devastating. In 1621 the Governor-General of the VOC, the iron-willed and merciless Jan Pieter Soen Koen, arrived at the Banda Islands with a fleet of warships and a large force of soldiers. He systematically set about conquering the islands, executing village elders, destroying communities,
and carrying out a campaign of deliberate depopulation. It is estimated that out of a population of some 15,000 Bandanese, fewer than 1,000 survived. The islands were then repopulated with Dutch planters and enslaved laborers brought from other parts of Asia to work the nutmeg groves, under the strict control of the VOC. Through this act of genocide, the Dutch secured their bloody monopoly. A similar though less extreme policy of restricting clove cultivation to the island of Ambon was also implemented. The competition with the English also had its famous moments. For a time the English managed to hold on to the tiny island of Run, one of the Banda Islands, but in the Treaty of Breda in 1667, which settled a war between the two nations, a seemingly minor exchange was made. The English agreed to cede their claim to the island of Run in exchange for a Dutch-held island in North America. At the time, the nutmeg-producing island seemed the far more valuable prize. The establishment of these direct sea routes and corporate monopolies had a profound impact on the world. In Europe, the influx of spices, though still expensive, eventually led to their wider availability and a decline in their price, transforming them from an exclusive luxury of the elite to a more common household item. More significantly, the immense profits from the spice trade, along with other colonial ventures, fueled the commercial revolution and the rise of capitalism in Northern Europe. The centers of economic power shifted decisively from the Mediterranean world of Venice and Genoa to the Atlantic nations of the Netherlands and England, whose burgeoning wealth would finance their rise to global dominance. For the peoples of the Spice Islands and other parts of Asia, the arrival of the Europeans brought not just new trading opportunities, but also brutal warfare, dispossession, enslavement, and the destruction of their traditional societies and trading network. The sweet scent of spice in European kitchens was inextricably linked to the bitter taste of colonial violence in the East. The powerful monopolies, however, could not last forever. For over a century, the Dutch VOC fiercely guarded its control over the production of nutmeg and cloves, eradicating any trees found growing outside their designated zones. But eventually the secret of the Spice Islands was broken, not by force of arms, but by botanical espionage. In the late 18th century, a resourceful French colonial administrator and botanist, named Pierre Poivre, successfully managed to smuggle nutmeg seedlings and clove plants out of the Dutch-controlled Moluccas. He transported them to the French colony of Mauritius, in the Indian Ocean, where they were successfully cultivated. Soon after, the British also managed to transplant spice trees to their own colonies, such as Grenada in the Caribbean, which became a major new source of nutmeg. With the successful cultivation of these spices in other parts of the world, the Dutch monopoly was shattered, and the global price of spices fell further, ending the era when these small seeds could command a fortune. The Great Spice Trade, a global drama that spanned centuries, was a powerful engine of historical change. It drove the age of discovery, funded the rise of empires, and created the world's first truly globalized economy. It connected the most remote islands of Southeast Asia with the burgeoning cities of Europe, creating intricate networks of exchange, competition and conflict. The desire for something as seemingly simple as a more flavorful meal reshaped maps, built vast fortunes, launched fleets, and caused untold human suffering. The story of the spice trade is a complex and often dark legacy, a testament to the immense power of human desire, ambition, and greed to shape the destiny of nations and the course of world history. The aroma of cloves and nutmeg no longer carries the same mystique or exorbitant price, but the world we inhabit today, with its interconnected economies and enduring patterns of global power, was irrevocably seasoned by the long and tumultuous quest for their possession.